Hannah, thanks so much for hopping on today. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Graham. Lovely to be with you.
Yeah, lovely to be with you too. I've really enjoyed following your work, and just for the benefit of anyone listening that hasn't come across your work, I have enjoyed tons of your material that you've put out there. You're a lawyer, you're founder of Authentically Speaking, you're an author of the recently released fantastic book, The Authentic Lawyer. You're a host of the Build Your Legal Business podcast, and you've got a ton of great resources on your website for lawyers. And having walked the talk yourself, you now support lawyers to develop their businesses and themselves as well. Is there anything that you would add to that in terms of what you do?
Well, there is a lot there, isn't there? I guess linked to the whole supporting lawyers to grow their businesses, etc., is that a few weeks ago I joined a new law firm as part owner, director and shareholder. So very much within that law firm, I've got sort of my own people to be looking after as well, and helping them grow their businesses, etc. So very exciting.
Great, yeah, very exciting times. And just for the benefit of people that maybe do know you and do know your work, do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey from being a lawyer in private practice to, founding the various businesses that you have and joining others?
Yes, absolutely. So if you go back about 12 years or so, I was an employed lawyer with Eversheds. It's obvious, it's it's on my LinkedIn profile, etc. Met some wonderful people while I was there. In fact, met my husband there. We had our first son. And then I took my year's maternity leave, and I think that was the time of change for me, was when I was on maternity leave, because suddenly I could plan my own day, I could go out for coffee, all the different things I could do. And I think that's when I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my career almost not beholden to other people, because when you're a lawyer with clients, you're always beholden to clients to a large extent, but having to account for my time all the time. I joke with people now that it is all about the coffee in the coffee shops, and it's for me, it's about being able to wake up in the morning, and unless I've got something in my diary, I can choose to go for coffee, and I can choose where I work from, etc. And it was that freedom that I had in maternity leave that I realized I wanted in my career. So I went back for a very short period of time. Then I left, not knowing necessarily what the future would look like. I dabbled with setting up a children's online clothes business, anything that would have been my own business. Quickly realized that I would make more money as a lawyer than potentially individually sewing children's clothes, as nice as they were, organic, and my expensive sewing machine I bought, etc. But then the opportunity to be a self-employed lawyer was presented to me, which is something I'd not come across before. It was 12 years ago. It was not that common at the time. And it was great. I started off just doing a little bit of work around my son, who was sort of 18 months old at the time, and then built that up over the coming 3 years after that. So sort of fast forward to being self-employed for 3 years, and I'd created a great business. I was earning well. We'd bought a new house, we'd bought new cars. I had 2 little boys by then, but I was working far too much. So being a lawyer and not liking to say no, and being an entrepreneur and wanting to grow a business, put all that together, and you've got someone who works till 10, 11 o'clock every night and doesn't say no, is not charging enough, etc. So I looked around and thought, this isn't really the life I want either. I was then suffering with chronic stress, starting to have panic attacks, a lot of symptoms of being really overstressed, not sleeping at night, but still not spending any time with my family. The whole point of becoming self-employed was to have spent more time with them, and to be in control of my life, and I still wasn't. So then it was sort of reassess the second time, if you like, and what is it that I actually want out of this. And that's when I discovered coaching, mentoring, business support, training, all the wonderful things that I discovered to be able to support me in staying in my business. And as a result of that, I just thought, this is fantastic stuff that other lawyers need. Other lawyers need to know how to manage their stress levels better, to reach out and get the support that they need, to be the best that they possibly can. And that's when I created Authentically Speaking as a business to support all lawyers, the whole legal profession, in terms of predominantly managing stress. That's what it was set up for in the beginning. What it's evolved into over the last 6 years is very much in part stress, but even more so is about the training and development to further your skills and to be the very best that you can. And an element of that is, yes, running your own business, if that's something that people want to do as self-employed lawyers. So that's been the sort of last 6 years or so. And then, yeah, just recently I've joined a new business. Well, I'm new to the business. The business itself is 6 or so years old, and want to bring some of that ethos to my own people as well.
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And lots of courageous steps there along the way, and a really good example of how to never give up on creating the life of your dreams and success as you define it, and really reinventing yourself a number of different times in the pursuit of going after the entire lifestyle that you want. And I really, really admire that. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Welcome.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your book, which has just been released, The Authentic Lawyer. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration for that, and also really who the target reader of that book might be.
Yes. So I say actually right at the front of the book why I wrote it and where the idea came from. And it was literally 2015, late on. I was driving home. I still remember the road I was driving down when I was trying to fight off this panic attack, this sense of, oh my goodness, what, I can't do this, overwhelmed, huge overwhelm. And as I think I talk about in the book and other people know, I always think the job as a lawyer is inherently a pressured job. There is a lot of stress involved in it, and people will say that, but it often just takes something else to tip you over the edge. And for me, it was when my dad got ill, and he phoned to say that he'd had a cancer diagnosis the week before. And I think for me, compounded with everything else that I was doing, the working late, the pressure that I was putting on myself for this business to grow, etc., then having this extra layer put on was almost the final straw. And that's where the panic attacks, etc., started. So I remember being in that moment, driving down that road and saying to myself, this will be for a reason. There is a purpose for this. And that's when the idea of the book first came, that I would use what I was learning and how I was going to get through it. Because as you mentioned there, I am sort of as soon as I see something that's wrong, I want to fix it. And I guess I decided at a young age I wanted to have the life that I wanted. And so if there's anything I don't like about it, I try and change it. And so in that moment, deciding that I was going to change it, and I was going to record how I changed it so that other people could learn from it. And that's where the inspiration from the book came from. That was the first idea. Now, in terms of who it's for, it was written for very much people who were probably in my situation at the time. That's when I started writing it 3 or so years ago. So it was written for people who maybe were a few years into the career, perhaps had started a family or were thinking about it, or at least had other things going on in their lives, and suddenly was thinking, is this it? I get up every day and I go to work and the job pays all right, but is this it for the rest of my life? Is this all there is? Is there any more? And it was originally written for people that were in that situation and were thinking like that. But actually, the people that have found it useful is far more than that. So aspiring and junior lawyers have found it really useful. Actually, business owners have found it useful because it does sort of chart my business ownership over the last 10 years as well. And also people who work with lawyers. So they might not be lawyers themselves, but they work with them. They found it really useful because it gives them an eye into the mind of a lawyer. Yeah,
wow, really interesting how widely the audience has spread for that. And I love what you said there about there was that incident with your dad and the diagnosis that really tipped things over the edge. And what strikes me there is that we're all in a position where, if not tragedy or disaster, then challenges are going to come our way. And it strikes me that whatever we're doing day to day, week to week, month to month, we need to have some sort of capacity to deal with things that come in our life. And in many ways, I think so many lawyers specifically are operating on the edge. that mindset of scarcity. Where's the next job coming from? We know all of the cliches. You're only as good as your last case, your last result. And whether it's you're on the solicitor side where it's billable hours and targets, or whether you're on the barrister's side where, despite the network of a chambers, it can seem more lonely because you're self-employed, or whether you're a self-employed lawyer, which a solicitor, sorry, which, is something that an area that you've worked in, and it is becoming more popular to offer a bit of flexibility, but it comes with that inherent pressure that you are perhaps a little bit more on your own. But wherever you are, there is this huge level of pressure, and unchecked, it can be incredibly unhelpful. And really, in any area of this business, I've found there aren't you can be no limitations on how much stress you put yourself under. And I suppose the question is, how do we make space for things that are going to inevitably come into our life so that we can sort of handle and cope with them? And yeah, I suppose it's that sort of response, like how are we going to respond? I work with a lot of clients that say, they're dealing with a lot of stress. And actually, when we break it down, what inevitably, like, removing some element of stress is helpful, but actually just being able to respond to those stresses is a more effective way of looking at those things. So I'd love to know if you can tell me any of the tools that you share with some of your clients to kind of help them manage stress or remove stress from their life.
Oh, isn't that a big question? I love what you were saying there, and maybe that is one tool that people can use. A phrase I really like is that you can't change things, you can only change yourself. Very much along the lines of you can't change other people, you can only change yourself and your reactions to it. And actually, one tool that I use often with my coaching clients, and also when I'm training other lawyers as well, I use this tool a lot. And it's, I know you're in the coaching world, you'll have your own phrase for it, but it's this idea of the cycle of thought creation, and I talk about it in my book. And it's this idea that actually we are in control of our thoughts and of our actions, and then sometimes even the situation more so than we think. So we have a thought, and then all sorts of emotions might come up with that. Maybe it's frustration, anger, jealousy, upset, whatever it is. And often that thought isn't necessarily the truth. It's just come out of past experiences or many things it kind of come from. It can just come up because we're tired or we're ill or whatever it is. And actually then how we feel about that and how we react to it is influenced by all of those other factors that may not be the truth. So it's actually easier to give an example of this because that's all very abstract. So we always say to people, imagine you are out for dinner with some friends, and now we're allowed to do that again, which is great. And you get up and go to the bathroom or to the bar, and then when you come back to the table, everybody stops talking. So what do you make that mean in that moment, the fact that everybody stopped talking? Now, I ask that in my sessions, and some people will say, well, that they were talking about me, that they don't really like me and they didn't really want me to come along and all that sort of thing. Okay, so how would you feel then if you've made it mean that? Well, I feel that I'm uncomfortable there, that I don't really want to be there anymore. And so what might you do? Well, I might get up and say, well, I'm going to leave now. I don't really want to be here anymore. Or I might sit quietly seething in the corner, for example. And I said to them, okay, let's switch that. Exactly the same situation happens. You walk back to the table, everybody stops talking, but you've got a big birthday coming up in a couple of weeks. And they're like, well, now I make it mean that they were planning my surprise party. So all of a sudden I say, well, then how do you feel? Do you feel upset, angry, like you want to leave? No, now I feel great. Now I feel like I've got the best friends in the whole wide world and I'm going to stay out and enjoy the rest of the night with them. So do you see how the same thing happened, but what we decide it means then indicates how we feel about it and the action we take. And you can see this in your everyday work as well. I used to get an email in that when I was at the height of my chronic stress, I'd receive an email that says, Hannah, contact me urgently. And I'd immediately make that mean that I'd messed up, I'd made a mistake. Therefore, I was going to lose a client, lose my business and lose my house. That's what I made that mean when I was in chronic stress. Whereas now I might get an email that says, call me urgently. And I go, have I got time to call them now before the next meeting? If so, yes, I will. If I haven't, I'll drop them an email and say, I'll call them later. That's it. That's as far as it goes. So we get to choose. And I think that's a really useful tool for people to start using. when they notice that thought and that reaction, catch themselves first and ask, is that thought really true? Do I need some more information? Do I need to check that out before I go down that rabbit hole of those feelings and those reactions?
Yeah, I love that. That's so helpful. And it's like, what else might be going on? You know, that's one of the things I often say to clients is try, and you know, it's such a hard, it's so hard work to try and catch these thoughts. But I always say to people, it is possible if you practice it. And, you know, when we're experiencing that stress, it makes complete sense to me that people struggle to use their rational brain. You know, we immediately, especially when we're suffering from chronic stress, put our body in a state of fight, flight, or freeze. And, you know, in many ways, our prefrontal cortex, our thinking mind, sort of shuts down, and we kind of really only have access to these thoughts that are survival thoughts. And in that space, that's when we come up with all sorts of unhelpful thoughts, ideas, which, as you say, then create a negative set of emotions, which actually leads usually to a really unproductive action. Even if that action outwardly is, oh, hello, Mrs. Client, yes, I'll do the work, no problem. And then the work gets done. It's like, at what cost does that come to you, your life, your family, your goals, as opposed to just thinking rationally and calmly what else might be going on here, and really kind of developing that as a practice. And I always use a really extreme example with regards to choosing our thoughts, because with a lot of clients, when this comes up, initially there's a lot of resistance. It's like, well, I don't choose my thoughts. You know, it's you know, they just come up. You know, and you know, but I think we've all had an example, and I haven't yet to have someone deny this, that sometimes you think something and you're like, well, that was a crazy thought. Like, I don't really think that. And it might, maybe when you're under stress, or someone you really love or care about says something that's irritating, you think something nasty, and you're like, whoa, yeah, no, that's not me. I don't really think that. And it's very easy to distance yourself from that. And that's a good example of how we can do that really at any time. But sometimes with those repetitive ones, scarcity mindset, specifically client pressures, it becomes really, really challenging to, you know, challenge those thoughts. But, you know, I always stress to people it is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say to my clients, when we tend to pick on one particular set of thoughts that they're feeling at the time, which can often be imposter syndrome, or, you know, I'm not as good as my colleague over here, or I'm not good enough to go for promotion, or something like that. There's some thought at the time that brings them to work with me, or that month that's important. And so I say to them, right, we're just going to zero in on that particular thought and those particular feelings this month, and just notice when they come up. You know, even if you do nothing more than that, realization is half the battle. Just notice when those thoughts come up. What sort of situations are you in? What are you doing? Who is it that you might be interacting with? And just start to get curious, you know, get nosy about it. And then, as you say, for a long time, for years, we're just controlled by these thoughts and didn't realize that we had any control over them. So for me, the first step is to start noticing it, just to get interested, to get curious. That can often be enough to start changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And just that curiosity and non-judgment of the thought is enough to kind of start the process of, you know, awareness, really. And that can really kick off a chain reaction of events where you can start to change those. So I love that.
Yeah.
You are in a space where you're working with clients on a one-to-one basis in coaching in the law, which is fantastic. Me too. I work with a wide variety of clients, you know, in the law and all sorts of industries. One of the things that's inspired me to really lean into my coaching practice is that I saw so much opportunity in the legal industry on all sides of the profession. And you know, in the US, for example, it's very commonplace for people to work with coaches, particularly in the legal industry. My experience has been that it's still an emerging modality in this country, and especially in the legal industry. I'd love to know what your experience has been in terms of working with lawyers on a one-to-one basis, and what type of an impact that is having on the individuals that you're working with at a high level.
So just as you say, it really is an emerging market still. When I started out about 6 years ago, I remember a business mentor of mine saying, you're not really going to have much luck coaching lawyers, you know, especially not talking to them about stress. No lawyers want to admit that they have stress or deal with it. And in fact, one of the first lawyers I spoke to when I was just setting up the business said, well, stress is just part and parcel of the job. It's just something we have to learn to accept. And I thought, maybe this business will take off, maybe it won't. But I think the messaging is changing. I mean, I do actually get people just contact me just for the stress, the anxiety, borderline depression, etc., and saying I want to work on this. That absolutely happens now. Whereas I try and frame it much more now around about being the best that we can possibly be. So yes, of course, I don't want people to suffer with stress, anxiety, and depression, and you should certainly reach out for whatever help you need, whether that might be counselling, whether that's coaching. Often it's a combination of the two. So you should absolutely do that. But I try and talk to people about coaching in a different way now, which is this is about being the best that we can be. It's about having tools that we didn't have before, tools that other people don't have, that stand us head and shoulders above them. So I know now I'm seeing junior people, some paralegals, some trainees, some aspiring solicitors come and ask for coaching and mentoring because they see the potential that this has to fast forward them in their careers. And I think that's the change, and the pandemic has helped with this as well. In the pandemic, there were people reaching out and investing in their own coaching and training because they wanted to come out of the pandemic as strongly as possible in whatever market we were then facing. So it's really wonderful to see it taking off in this country, as you say, when it was so popular in the US, and now it's coming over here, and not just to solve a problem, but actually to make us the best that we possibly can in the future.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think it's, you know, coaching in many ways works when we're moving from functional to optimal. And, you know, I love that. I know I'm speaking to a lot of leaders that are looking to get coaching. I mean, the thing, I'd love to get your perspective on this. I speak to a lot of leaders, and initially the first response is that coaching might be for people that are struggling within the team or having some challenge. And that makes perfect sense. And of course, I think coaching can benefit anyone unless there's a modality that's going to be more preferential to their specific needs. But I really always try and stress the benefits of working with the top performers. And my experience of working with top performers in a team environment is that if you can get those people, the top performers, thinking more widely about their impacts on the business and on the team, it actually has a really positive impact on the people that are struggling, because the top performers usually have more capacity to look around, and they're actually normally looking for something that's more fulfilling. And what that is helping out with the team and you know, developing everyone and investing in the group in a more in a wider way. And so I'd love to know what your experience has been like working with top performers, high achievers that perhaps not necessarily are struggling with stress and anxiety, but just looking for more from work or life.
Yes, and that's true. That's where I've sort of shifted over the last year, 18 months probably, is much more to people who they're not struggling with anything on the surface at all. Wouldn't say they were struggling. It's really that they want to up level their skills. And I think it's interesting you mentioned the leadership aspect, because from my own perspective, business wise, I knew that 2022 was going to be the year that I shifted more into working with people more in the leadership space, because that's where I think I can make the biggest impact now. Because just as you say, it's the leaders that look after the people. So if you've got good leaders who know how to regulate their own emotions, who have good emotional intelligence, good empathy, you know, are authentic, which is my favorite value. If they're all those things to their people, then that is supportive of all of those people underneath them. So I think it is really important for any in a leadership and management, whatever you want to call it, role. It's a role, not a title. So it doesn't matter what your title is. If your role is that you are looking after other people, you're a role model, you're an inspiration, you're a leader to other people, then you really want to get these skills for yourself, because they are looking up to you. So it's all well and good people in a leadership role in a law firm saying, oh, well, we've put on some yoga for you at lunchtime, or some meditation training, or some stress management training. It's all well and good to do that. But if that leader is not going to it, and if that leader is not role modeling it for their team, then it's useless. You know, it's a waste of time and money. So I think for me personally this year, and I can hear you've looked into it as well, that focus on the leaders is really, really important. And in this time of great resignation, etc., you know, people don't leave a company, they leave a boss. So, you know, from another perspective, to actually have people who are really good in their leadership role is going to make a big difference to the business as well.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, I love that you said that people don't leave a business, they leave a boss. And what that evoked within me was this thought that, I mean, first of all, I always say that, you know, leadership isn't, it's not given in a title, you know, it's earned with actions. And the other thing that comes up for me there is that I always find that the most effective teams are teams where the majority of the team look at the leader of the team or the business or the organization and say, that's the type of life that I want. And, you know, conversely, if, you know, I've also worked in businesses where the vast majority of the group look at the leader and the boss and they say, that is not a life that's for me. And that is so demotivating to know that the top spot, even if it's 3 or 4 positions up, is somewhere that you don't want to be. It's lifestyle that you don't want to be living. And more often than not, that's because of lifestyle choices of the leader and the way they're choosing to live their life. But, you know, I always say to the leaders that I work with, if you want to, you've got to be living a lifestyle that the vast majority of your team are looking at and that they want. And you want them to be pushing for that as well. It's so important. And what that means is more than just being a great leader, more than doing the necessary functions of your role. It means having your life together, or at least taking some steps to try and improve the challenges that you're facing in your life. We are all going to have times in our life where we're fighting fires. We've got some real challenges going on. And maybe we've even taken a few wrong turns in life and we're in a not great place. But that endeavor of seeing someone trying to make positive changes, and sometimes that means putting life and family ahead of work. And I think it's so important for leaders in the modern world to demonstrate that, particularly as the gap in terms of, you know, broadly speaking, values is becoming so different between the people at the junior end of the workforce and at the top end of the workforce. So I'd love to know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, well, I couldn't agree with you more. And in the law, we're going to start to see a big problem with this, in my opinion, because traditionally, this is what traditional model law firms relied on. They wanted the people at the bottom to work all the hours, put in the overtime, because they wanted to rise to the top, to become partners and equity partners. But now they're looking at that and going, no, I don't want that. Then how exactly are you going to get them to do all this free overtime that makes law firms so profitable? If they don't want that top position, you're not going to get them to stay, and you're not going to get them to you know, put in that extra effort, etc. And as I say often, it came from a friend of mine, the quote, the law is a great career, but a terrible job. And it's so true. If you go into this and just want a 9 to 5, then it's just going to be a bit stressful and in a lot of ways a bit boring. It's the extra bits that make it really interesting. So yeah, if people can't see those in management living a life that they want, then ultimately they won't stay at that organization and they won't perform. And I think, just as you I think we're alluding to there, we're seeing this in even greater focus at the moment, with the fact that those who are coming out of you know, university education and post-pandemic, even more so, their values of work-life balance and health and mental well-being are so much higher up there than any of ours were when I came out 25 years ago. It was all about hard work, recognition, you know, achievement. All those sorts of things were what drove myself and our generation, they are not driving the vast majority of the new generation. I know that's a huge generalization and there are different people there, but I'm speaking to a lot of team leaders and supervisors and bosses who are saying, I just don't understand them. I don't get these people. And you know what's happening now is that these people, you know, and quite rightly, and, you know, good for them, are saying, you know, I work till 5:30 and that's it. That's my contracted hours. I'm finished, I'm gone. But then there's those people in the middle who are having to pick it all up. Because, you know, if the client work has to go out that day, the client work has to go out that day. And so they're picking it up and it's increasing their stress levels. And it can create this resentment potentially between the two generations. So there is a big issue. And that I'm working with quite a lot of firms at the moment as to how they manage that. You know, I'm training the supervisors on the one hand and the juniors on the other, because we've got to meet in the middle here somewhere. Otherwise, there's huge issues being stored up for the future. And I don't know what the future of these firms is. If you've just got people who, you know, I'm just going to work my 9 to 5. You know,
well, I think that, first of all, I'm really encouraged to hear that you're working with firms that are providing coaching and specific training to people at the more junior end. And I suppose that, you know, there's two things to focus on. There's that, well, what are the solutions? But I'm probably more of a, you know, where are the opportunities as opposed to where are the solutions? And I think the opportunities are for the law firms out there that are willing to take seriously the needs and the values of their junior staff. You know, I've spoken to a number of different, you know, really big law firms like the L&D teams, and the message coming back from a lot of those organizations, and this is not just my experience, I've spoken to lots of other coaches that operate in this space, but and again, huge generalization, I'm sure there's some firms out there that operate differently, but largely the message coming back is that coaching is reserved for senior partners and senior managing partners, and there's no interest in offering coaching at the junior level. And that really spoke to that thing of, well, you know, do your time, earn your stripes, put in the hours. And I think that you know, that may change, and those firms definitely have the budget to shift their mindset on that if they're starting to see talent not coming in or talent leaving. But there's huge opportunity, I think, there for law firms that are perhaps not necessarily paying as higher wages as those firms, but are willing to invest more in their people and take a more longer term approach to retention, which, as we know in the law, is huge for client satisfaction, that consistency, knowing the business, knowing the client base, building the relationships. And, you know, I think it must be an exciting time for young leaders, forward-thinking leaders that are prepared to thinking about managing and running law firms differently. So I'd love to know if you have any thoughts on the opportunities that I've just sort of chucked out there.
Well, I agree with you, and I think the figures speak for themselves. It costs on average £200,000 to £250,000 to train a trainee. So my view is, if you're investing that much money in a person, why would you stop at investing in some decent training and or coaching if they need it to help them to be the very best that they can be? You're already investing a large amount of money in them, and as you say, you want to retain them if possible, especially the best people, and for client continuity and firm continuity. So yeah, to me, as a business owner, it's a bit of a no-brainer. If you're already investing that much, why are you not investing in the extra skills and tools that they might need? But as I mentioned earlier, what's very interesting is that more and more of these people are willing to invest in it for themselves. I would say in lockdown, more than half of my paying clients were paralegals, trainees, juniors, who were coming and paying with their own money to develop these skills for themselves. And I think that's brilliant for the future. But those firms who don't invest in them and don't realize the investment these people are making will lose them. They will lose them to either their own businesses, which is great. You know, I'm a huge fan of self-employment, or to other more forward-thinking firms.
Yeah, and really encouraging to hear you say that people are choosing to invest in these types of services off their own back. That's been my experience too. And I think that some employers are willing to make a contribution, and that may be a fair balance. But it's really, really wonderful to see people invest in themselves. And in many cases, that makes a lot of sense, particularly with life coaching, because you know, a lot of people want the relationship to be directly with the coach, and so that they, you know, they're handling that relationship, and there's no concern that the employer is, you know, having any interaction with the coach or feeding in any way. So in many ways that can be more comfortable for the employer just to contribute to the coaching arrangement. In terms of one of the words that comes through in all of your businesses and your book, and you just mentioned there, is a highest value for you, or high value for you, is authenticity. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that as a value, and what the impact of honoring the value of authenticity kind of like looks like in the real world.
Oh, wow, that's a big one. So I think it came about for me as I was setting up my second business, the Authentically Speaking, and I was looking at what my journey had done for me. So yes, it got me out of chronic stress. It gave me much more confidence. I learned to delegate. The legal business I created was much more what I wanted. So it did all those things for me. But one of the biggest things that it did for me, when I sat down and asked myself, what is it? Who am I? That was the question. Who am I? If I'm not just a lawyer, I would introduce myself to people. I'm Hannah, I'm a lawyer. And I'd wanted to be a lawyer since I was 13. So I'd created this whole identity around who I was. And that was who I was. And years later, when I'm sat there trying to deal with chronic stress, etc., and asking myself what else there was in life and what else did I want to do, so I had this question of who am I? And when I asked myself that question, many years later, etc., I went back to who I was when I was younger. And who I was when I was younger, one particular thing stood out. And again, I talk about it in the book, which is that every summer my dad would hire a video camera and he'd film the three of us, there's me and my brother and sister. And every time he switched on this camera, there was me in the front of it, presenting the 6 o'clock news, interviewing the rabbit, you know, whatever I was doing at, 8 or 9 years old at the time I was. And I looked and I thought about that, and I thought, wow, I don't do anything like that now. Like, I'm not in front of people, I'm not speaking to people. And yet that's what I loved to do as a child. And I know that because of my journey of moving from the south to the north, and bullying and not being spoken to for years because of my accent, etc., I can see very easily why my voice was silenced, if you like, and why I didn't step up and didn't stand up to speak. But that realization that that's who I was as a child and that's what I loved to do, really then came through in the planning of my second business, which was going to be all about speaking, training, being a voice for people, for lawyers, until they're ready to have their own voice. So it was this sense of who I was authentically and bringing that back into my life again that really was the idea for the second business, and has spurred on everything since. And every time I speak to lawyers about becoming more authentic, you can almost see the visible relief in them. They can let go of some of who they think they ought to be and who they're trying to be, which is all tied up with anxiety, stress, depression, ultimately, all those sorts of things tied up with trying to be somebody else. But when you give them permission to start being who they are, the relief is just fantastic. So that follows through into the presentations I give. I've got a keynote I do on authenticity as a superpower, because I really believe from a business development perspective and brand and everything for lawyers, being who they authentically are is a real superpower. So I do that with a lot of my clients. But yeah, for me, it was the key to unlocking what do I want to do with my life, and all the opportunities that I've had to get to where I am now, which I'm beyond grateful for. You know, I love the work that I do. Like, I literally get up and I'm excited every day. My husband laughs at me. But the key to all of that was, who am I authentically? And therefore, what should I be doing? What should I be doing in the world that fits with me?
Yeah, and I love that. And, you know, a lot of that, what have you just said there, resonates with my own journey. And I've just to add to that, what I've found and what I've found from working with clients on aligning with values and being more authentic is that the more that we can do that, the more we begin to just find levels of energy, reserves of confidence that were previously inaccessible. It simply seems to me that we're capable of doing things that we previously thought we were incapable of doing. until we kind of align with our authenticity and start doing it. And that doesn't mean, you know, leaving your job, starting a new career. It can just mean slowly beginning to take steps to change the way you think, to change the way you show up, and to start to reflect on that and say, well, what's changed here? Am I worse off? Am I better off? Do I feel happier? Do I feel more joy? Do I feel more energized? And if the answer is yes, then keep going on that journey. And if the answer is no, then wheel back. But yeah, I love to hear that. And I think it really resonates with what I'm seeing with a lot of people. And I think that especially in the law, where it's very typical to learn through osmosis, through working with senior partners, learning styles. If you're an advocate, learning from the other people in your chambers, that it can become very common to just look outside and take bits from other people without often enough adding our own voice to how we want to show up, how we want to do the work, how we want to engage with clients. And that's where I think the magic lies. That's where I don't totally agree with you that's where our superpower is. I love that.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's where the magic is. Zone of Genius, the book. Oh goodness, Gay Hendricks, I think, one of my favorite books, The Big Leap. He's also written Zone of Genius, I'm pretty sure. So I love that. But you know, it's also the answer to, people say to me a lot, how do you do it all? You know, you've got 3 boys, and now 4 businesses, 2 owned by me and 2 co-owned. How do you do it all? I'm like, it is that I'm doing what I should be doing, and it's not so much how do I do it all, it's that I don't have a choice. You know, when I woke up in the pandemic about a month or 2 in, and I would say woke up, I couldn't sleep, and I realized it's because I wasn't doing what I should be doing. All my training was cancelled. I wasn't in firms helping people anymore. So I set up all my free groups online that I ran during lockdown, because I needed to be doing what I need to be doing, if that makes sense. So when you're in that place of doing what you should be doing authentically, it's not how do you get it all done, it's that you have no choice.
Yeah, and it's, you know, if we're feeling drained and de-energized all of the time, it's not, you know, I really encourage people to start looking at that and saying, what's actually going on here? You know, because it's not normal for us to be low on energy all the time. It's not normal for us to be demotivated, to have foggy brains. And we often look to things like diet and exercise and sleep. And yes, these are all physical ways in which our energy can be impacted. But, you know, our energy can be impacted emotionally if we're, you know, we don't have a way of processing the emotions that are coming up for us. We can be drained mentally if the work is, you know, not stimulating, if it just feels like a churn. We can, in the work that I do, I say that we can be influenced spiritually, and in the work that I do, that's more about purpose and being aligned with, you know, what you see as purposeful or meaningful in the world. And that can be incredibly draining, to be doing a job that you don't think is meaningful. And again, it doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to have to leave your job. It might just mean adding an element to your work that you consider to be meaningful personally, and that can make all of the difference to someone's life. So there's lots of different ways to look at this.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you can't find that purpose in your life or your career at the time. So say in your work. So where could you find it maybe outside of your work? As you say, purpose is such a powerful driver and energizing as well. And if you really can't find it in your day-to-day work, what else might you do? You know, my husband has found his coaching the 8-year-olds football team. He lives
exactly.
there, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Sometimes it's necessary to look outside the workplace for that inspiration. And then it's about having the courage and the conviction to commit to that and making the space for it, right?
Yes, yeah. Definitely.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end this on. What a lovely conversation. Thank you very much for taking the time. I know you're very busy with all your businesses and stuff, so thank you.
Oh, no, thank you, Graham. It was a pleasure to chat.
Before we lock off, do you want to tell people where they can find you, your resources, your book and everything else?
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So do feel free to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. That would be very welcome. The book, The Authentic Lawyer, is available on Amazon, hard copy and Kindle. Should be available on Audible in the next few months, hopefully. And then my website is authenticallyspeaking.co.uk, where there are lots of free resources, various guides on overwhelm, boundaries, all those sorts of things. You can find out more there.
Great, excellent. And are you going to be doing the voiceover for the audio book?
Of course I am.